Right, Shane. Well, I was chuckling in between that because I'm sure there's a lot of trainers that love trying to put you guys away. One of the things that you said to me in your principles of what makes you successful is to know the horse. Now, can you go a bit more in depth as into what you mean by that? Know the horse. Obviously,
Yeah,
knowing the horse on the trial is a good start, but from then on,
yeah, I think it's just trying to understand some characteristics of the horse, which which makes them a good horse or an average horse for whatever reason. So there's plenty of examples. I suppose where I sort of developed that more and more was, I suppose I started by believe your eye was sort of my first thing. I'd like to, when I don't know how to articulate it any better than you like what you see. So I like the way this horse moves, or I like its action, or I like the way it pins its ears back when it's asked to surge, or conversely, when a jockey gets the horse off the bridle and asks it to quicken, it might put its neck to the side and want to lay in a little, or lay out a little bit under pressure. And then I use the data to sort of back that up. Like if you see one that I like the way it looks, I like the way it moved, but then you go back to then you go and cross-reference that against the data and the sectional times, and it doesn't quite. The sectional times or the data suggests that it didn't go as good as what you thought it did. So I suppose that was an extension of that, is like understanding the horse. As you see many a horse that could run a nice third in a metropolitan race, nice run, done the same things wrong. It wanted to lay in a little bit under pressure and the jockey couldn't straighten it and took a little bit of time to hit top speed. And then you see that horse drop back a grade, back to provincial grade, and it'll go off a short price favourite because it ran third in a metropolitan grade to start before. But you know that horse, and you know that when the jockey's going to ask this horse to quicken, it's going to put its neck on the side and want to lay in like it has for its entire career. And then you can sort of apply that to so it's back to provincial grade. It's going to lay in under pressure at some stage, and this is a tight turning circuit back in the provincials in the country track. And by the time this horse gets around that corner, balance itself up, and tries to make its run, it's going to be too far back. So I use that information of knowing the horse to take a position either against or for that horse based on all those factors of where it is. But there's a lot more sophisticated betting operations nowadays that use data, and so that's why I keep know your horse. My number one rule is because I need to find something in that horse or see something in that horse that's not necessarily able to put a figure against or have one of those big betting syndicates that use purely data. I'm trying to look for something that they can't see in a number or a factor.
Right, you've anticipated one of my questions there, so I should go straight onto it. So you make a living backing horses based largely on what you see. So what do you see that other people don't see?
Well, I suppose we discussed in detail. I'm seeing my pool of horses that I bet into. I see them at the jump outs before they go to the race, so that's the first thing, I suppose.
Yeah.
I go to track work, things like that. I suppose it's just plenty of examples. Even race day mood. There's plenty of examples of horses that play up. They get too hyped up in the yard, or they get too hyped up. They're going to the barriers. They want to charge to the barrier, and then get behind the barrier. They're all worked up, and they don't begin as well because they're all fizzy and they're all fired up. They don't begin as well, or they over race and then you can, because I see these horses most weeks, and you're watching the parade, and you might see it just, geez, he's relaxed today, this horse. He's his mind's on the job. He's there to race. So that's sort of the pre-race stuff, and you can see them on the way. When you're on course, you can see them, galloping away to the starting gates. You can see that the horse is relaxed and that sort of thing. And I do keep sort of notes on that sort of stuff on the horses that stand out, but mainly I think the horse in the run. Like I touched on before, there's plenty of examples of horses that don't respond under pressure, or this certain horse doesn't corner well. But when he balances up and he's able to work through his gears in the straight, he's, you know, he can really flatten out and stretch out nicely. So he's not suited to a tighter turning track. And in Queensland, you know, in the areas that I work in, we have such a diverse range of tracks. We have, you know, Sunshine Coast, Eagle Farm, you know, that race home metropolitan meetings where there's, you know, really big long straights. Then you get to other places, say Doomben is another metropolitan track, for example, which mainly favours the on-speed runners, a little bit tighter corners, you know, horses, you know, kicking out of those corners and hard to run past. Shorter straights, harder to get momentum from the back, that sort of thing. Such a diverse sort of range of tracks, and yeah, it's a cliche, horses for courses, but it's you know, it's definitely a thing that I look at, that horses that are suited or unsuited because of that, just because of their racing patterns or racing manners in particular. The racing patterns are, you know, they're well documented. It's easy to find. There's plenty of information out there in the marketplace where you can go to bet on a track and identify it's a leader's track and just back the leaders or the horses that are rails in run through speed maps and all those other things. But there's the things that I'm looking for is the sort of things that are hard to quantify, you know, and that's those racing manners, I suppose. So, you know, firstly, I'm seeing them at the trials and then at track work, and then, you know, their racing manners, you know, becomes a big thing. And you might see a horse that just didn't want to really take a gap or didn't really want to let down because it was sort of looking around, and then you see it next start, it has a set of winkers or, you know, a set of blinkers on to you know, which will sharpen its focus. And you know, I'm sort of looking for those type of horses that have got some improvement in them with a change of gear, you know, be it blinkers or winkers or something like that. So bit of a long-winded answer, I suppose. But
no. So you say you see these horses. So do you go racing? Is that what you do? Do you actually go to the track to bet?
Yeah. So obviously, the last 3 months in Australia, I haven't been able to attend a racetrack with COVID. So it's been a lot more difficult. But yeah, definitely, you know, I'll go to the barrier, the jump out / trials on a Tuesday, and then, you know, track work either Friday and or Saturday. Because those are the 2 days that the more traditional do their faster work. And yeah, so I'm looking at that, and then to the track. Look, I'm not professing to be a yard watcher as such. You know, I'm not really, you know, focusing on the minute details of a parade ring, you know, a pre-race parade. But it's certainly a factor when you're just looking at them, either parading or going to the gates, just looking at and noting certain horses and their characteristics and their behaviours.
Okay, now you mentioned that you specialise in racing Southeast Queensland. I assume that's because that's where you are, but and the pool of horses is about 600. Now, is that too small a number for you to get that much of an edge, or is it just a manageable number? Because I would imagine people over here would be thinking, well, that's not many. You'd soon get to know them inside out, and a lot of other people would as well. Yeah,
for sure. So where I live, there's a training centre, and there's about 600 horses registered at the training centre. So so those 600 horses would run, you know, about maybe 3 meetings a fortnight, I suppose. But they also go, you know, and race, you know, so I'm probably, major metropolitan race meetings are in Brisbane, for example, and I'm probably about 130 kilometres west. So these horses that are trained here, they still go and race elsewhere within Southeast Queensland. So I don't see, you know, the Brisbane trained horses and that sort of thing that they're competing against. And that's where I use my form analysis to try and stack up, you know, the horses that I follow here when they go to and race elsewhere. But I suppose a larger proportion of my business is done on the tracks around my hometown. So within like a, you know, 80 or 100 kilometre radius, there's 5 or 6 racetracks that these horses that are trained here will race, and that's where I do the majority of my business. And then, you know, the odd ones, you know, go into town or, you know, in the metro areas or something like that, away from my immediate local area, but still happy to follow them down there and do the form, you know, based around there as well.
You say that you like to confirm what you see. and you back up with data and sectionals. Now, it's like, for example, sectionals, is that readily available, or would you have to subscribe and do your own timings?
Yeah, so I subscribe to a program. So and that's able to give me, it's a ratings program. It's also able to gives me some sectional time, so I can look at sectional time performances on the day, just in raw figures, as in like the actual time itself. And then I'm also able to look at those sectionals in benchmark as a benchmark rating. So I can look at, for example, if we're just looking at maiden horses, maiden class, I can compare maiden class to maiden class, and then once they win one race and step into to a class one or benchmark race, I'm able to sort that by looking at that horse's performance against an overall benchmark, which is all horses, all class. So that helps differentiate a little bit, when you're looking at these unraced horses coming through, and you're trying to measure an unraced horse, you only really have to measure that horse against other maiden horses. And then obviously once they win a race and then step into the class, or we have benchmark system over here, the program is also able to give you that data, by comparing all class benchmark as well. So I do use both, but I do like to drill in a little bit deeper into some meetings and look at some raw sectional times as well. But mainly it's a ratings database.
Okay, you don't have any problem betting on maidens. I mean, the history of racing is littered with horses that went on to win the Derby getting beaten first time out. Are the prices you get in sort of compensating for that greenness?
Yeah, it's tough. It's certainly not as easy as what it was when I first started. Obviously, when you're first starting out, you've got a few accounts with a few different bookmakers. You can sort of pick off a few odds on a Friday night for the races that are Saturday and take a really early position. Nowadays it's not as easy. Winning accounts are pretty well cut off to anything until the minimum bet law kicks in. So in Australia, the minimum bet law is at 9 a.m. on race day. Any bookmaker that puts their odds up has to bet you to win $1,000 as a minimum bet. So a lot of business is done. You notice, for anyone that sort of watches Australian racing and has a look at some market fluctuations on Australian racing, there's a fair bit of action at 9 a.m. where most people are trying to get set for at least the minimum across the board, and then the sort of the day's wagering goes on from there. But for these horses that are unseen, most bookmakers now are very cautious of certain stables in particular that are producing an unseen first starter. The odds are nowhere near as generous as what they once were, and getting on at the top odds is now well and truly a thing of the past. And it's most of the time you've just got to hope that no one else saw what you saw, and the price is still there race day. So it's becoming more difficult. I'm not saying it's becoming more difficult to get on. You do hear that a little bit in Australia about it's hard to get on. I think what most people are referring to there, it's hard to get on at the top price that a bookmaker comes up with in the early odds. Most of the time those prices are going up just to get a feel from the market, and getting one or two, it only takes one or two people to take those early odds, and that'll set the price off across the board. So a lot more difficult to see to get the top odds. But look, I suppose the quality of horses, if I'm being honest, the quality of horses that we have, in this pool of horses in southeast Queensland, I would say are lesser quality than what you'd find in a major metropolitan centres like Sydney and Melbourne, for example. Over here, the two major centres, the best bred horses, go to Sydney and Melbourne basically, and so a pretty even bunch really in southeast Queensland. There's certainly I don't think there's going to be too many horses, if any, that are going to get beaten in a maiden first up and go on to win a Group 1. But just the way they train over here too, particularly in Queensland, there's a lot of prize money for 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. So early, they want to get their horses up and running early, because that's where the breeding bonuses and those sorts of things attached to our prize money over here. It's all geared towards 2- and 3-year-olds. So all the trainers, or majority of the trainers, want to get their horses up and running early, punch a couple of good jump outs into them, get them up and running, and go and win a maiden as a 2 and 3 year old that are worth good money, more so than win a 4. So for an example, a 3 year old maiden with a Queensland breeders bonus would be worth say 30,000. A 4 year old maiden because the breeders bonus cuts out at 3. So a 4 year old maiden with no bonus is worth about 10,000 to the winner, like at a provincial track, on a Friday afternoon, for example. So most of the trainers want to get their Queensland bred horses up and running early and try and win some of those bonuses. So not many are leaving much in the tank there early on in their preparations or early on in their careers. If a horse can gallop a bit, they certainly get them up and going. And